I took quite a bit of time to arrange some thoughts here that I'd like to share now, and I'm going to be mostly reading them, which I usually don't do. And that's to try to focus comments on what is a difficult topic to talk about. And hopefully, this reduces my opportunities to misspeak here. The topic is finances. I want to give you an executive summary on these thoughts to begin because they're a bit lengthy. And if you aren't going to stick around for them, I just want you to hear the bottom line up front. First off, I sincerely want to thank all of you who've donated anything to the foundation, and especially thank those that have made generous monthly donations. The reason I have to make this video, unfortunately, it's not just to say thanks, but it's to communicate that what the situation is. I know people have questions, and they, thankfully don't normally pepper me with questions about this, but I know people want to know, and it's your right to know. But it's not something I want to make continuous videos about. It's not why people are tuning in, and so hopefully I can condense all of this into one and address most of the questions or concerns people might have. The situation right now is that the benefits of many are disproportionately paid by the donations of the few. And I feel horrible making this video because I fully expect that it'll be the people who have already been so generous who take these things to heart. And it shouldn't be that way. It's not right for so few to bear such a burden for so many. Right now, there are about 26 people making monthly donations. And I continuously ask for God's blessings upon you and also all those who would give if they were in a position to. But the current situation is not sustainable. The amount of money coming in, it's about 25% of what I was making before I was canceled. It's not enough to cover our bills, and most of the money actually comes from a few large donors, and so it's particularly sensitive to changes. So for those who find value in these materials but don't donate, the only reason you continue to have access to these materials is because they're made free for the sake of those who don't yet know about them or who are truly poor. That's the reason why these things are given away for free. There's a doctrinal reason that I'll get to later. But with very few exceptions, there's no reason that those who find value in these things should not be making a recurring donation. So I hope that those of you who are not donating begin to, and that those who could afford to help more will consider doing so, according to the specifics of your situation. So now we're going to get into the details. So there's 3 points I'd like to make, and I hope that what you find is that the principles that I'm teaching are applicable to many situations, even all of those that I have nothing to do with. They also happen to be applicable to my situation, but I hope that you find value in both cases. So here are the 3 points. Point number 1, you have a duty to support those who are spending their full time serving you. Point number 2, you have the opportunity of serving those who have already served you. And point number 3, you should give as long as you get more than you give. I will say before jumping into these points, there is so much to teach about the economics of God's kingdom. God has shown me a lot of this. It's not incredibly relevant for where people are right now. It is extremely relevant for building Zion. And there's a gradient of progression from here to there. But with everything I do, I have to arrange what I'm teaching to best suit the current situation and prioritize how I lay these things out over time. So this is not the full shebang. There's more of a shebang. Okay, point number 1. You have a duty to support those who are spending their full time serving you. 3 years ago last month, I lost my job as a tenured professor as a result of the blog I had kept for some 10 years prior, resulting in a loss of 50% of my income and every chance I had at ever being a professor again. I was told that by an attorney who represented me. And I have proven that subsequently because I have applied for professor jobs. In the subsequent 3 years, I did my best to rebuild my other job, which was as the founder and CEO of a tech startup. I spun that out during my time as a professor. But after the 20 or so employees I had walked off the job as a result of harassment resulting from the press and their friends at the time of my cancellation 3 years ago, I had to rebuild everything from scratch. So I'm quite proud of what we were able to do. I worked like a maniac, and God blessed me abundantly in being able to solve excruciatingly difficult problems of every nature that you could imagine in that sort of situation, including the technical problems that we faced in building that product. And I'm quite proud of what I was able to do with the 4 coworkers I was able to find and train and get them to a productive state. But after a long period of furloughs, the company went out of business about 2 months ago. So since then, it's been all donations. And like I said, they haven't been sufficient to cover our expenses, which we've tried to minimize as much as we can. I've spent many hours each week on ministry over the last 10 years, and even more in the last 3, and even more in the last 2. Every time I had an opportunity, whether that was from becoming more efficient at my job or from these changes that occurred with the cancellation and the subsequent shrinkage of the company over time due to reduced funding, I just put everything I had into ministry. I was hoping that other people, as they applied what I was teaching in their lives, they'd see so much of an increase in value that they would rather help financially to keep me producing these things and prefer me to do that than spend my time earning money. And a few of you clearly do. And I am so grateful and I appreciate it. But I think that there's a disconnect. There's an apparent disconnect between the value perceived. We're not talking about received, because if you valued it as much as I do, that would just be ridiculous, and we can't even hope for that. But if you perceive greater value, I have every reason to believe that you perceive greater value, at least many of you, than what you're giving. And we'll get into some details about some limiting factors there. But I want to read to you the following, which was said to Joseph Smith. And that might offend you for various reasons, but let's try to sidestep that so that this doesn't have to be too long. An overwhelming theme, a recurring theme in this presentation is I'm presupposing that you find value in what I do. If you don't, this video is not for you. This isn't like some churchy thing where someone's going to drop the hammer on you and compel you to pay your money to an organization, regardless as to whether you actually find value in it or not. That's not what this is about. You know exactly what I'm doing with the money. I'm paying my bills so that I can spend all of my time doing this, right? It's pretty cut and dry. So anyway, here's what the Lord said to Joseph Smith in D&C 24. For thou shalt devote all thy service in Zion, and in this thou shalt have strength. Be patient in afflictions, for thou shalt have many, but endure them, for lo, I am with thee, even unto the end of thy days. And in temporal labors thou shalt not have strength, for this is not thy calling. Attend to thy calling, and thou shalt have wherewith to magnify thine office, and to expound all scriptures, and continue in laying on of the hands, and confirming the churches. So this is the pattern that I'm trying to apply here, that I've been directed to try to apply. I did not want things to go this way. My strength in temporal labors, to use this language, has been taken from me. I did everything I could since childhood to build up my earnings potential And those of you who know me better know that. It might just be clear from the things you've heard me say in these videos. And I've had a pretty good run. There's a long list of challenges that I was able to overcome with the Lord's help in those regards. Like I said, I'm pretty pleased with how it went, all things considered. But it seems like God had other plans. Giving you these things cost me my career and other lifelong investments that were designed to support me and my family. There's really no way around that. It's the truth. Now, there's a spiritual component to the sacrifice I've made and continue to make that can't be described here, but on the temporal grounds alone, the part you can see, I will never be made whole for what I've already paid to produce what I have and will give you. I'm not asking to be restored for what I've given. Like I said, I don't expect any of you to value these things as much as I do. I wish you would, but I don't expect it. But I do ask for what I need to continue to give you more. To Emma Smith, the Lord described that her husband would support her in the church, or from the church. For unto them is his calling, that all things might be revealed unto them, whatsoever I will, according to their faith. That's from D&C 25, verse 9. Now, it's up to you to decide if you perceive that the Lord has given me strength in service in Zion. It's up to you to decide what it means for me to attend my calling or magnify my office, or whether there's value in these scriptures that I expound or in the other things that I do. But what I'm asking is that if there is value there, that you more appropriately align your resources to supporting it. Again, just one more passage from D&C 24 to show that this is indeed a pattern, and whether or not it applies to me is for you to decide. But I'm not making this up, right? Verse 18 from D&C 24, and thou shalt take no purse nor scrip, neither staves nor 2 coats. In other words, you're not going to have this self-sustaining financial enterprise where you're fully independent from other people. Quite the opposite. You will be broken down to exactly what you need so that you're fully reliant on other people. Who? Continuing to read here. For the church shall give unto thee in the very hour what thou needest for food and for raiment and for shoes and for money and for scrip. Did you catch that? So it's absurd for people who come from an LDS background to find offense in these things, and it's strange for them to find them so foreign. And the reason is because the more modern system is completely made up. That's the reason. But we don't have to digress into that. For thou art called to prune my vineyard with a mighty pruning, yea, even for the last time. Yea, and also all those whom thou hast ordained, and they shall do even according to this pattern. And that if you read the Doctrine and Covenants, this was set up. There were people who were supported out of funds from the church, from the people they served. You can look, this isn't a new thing. You can look in Malachi, reread Malachi, the bit about having meat in his house. What's his house? What's meant there? It's the body of believers, right? Meat, the sustenance. The list here was food, raiment, shoes, money, scrip. He gets a house at one point, more than one, right? Why? D&C 24, verse 3. Magnify thine office, and after thou hast sowed thy fields and secured them, go speedily unto the church which is in Colesville, Fayette, and Manchester. Listen to this part. And they shall support thee, and I will bless them, both spiritually and temporally. But if they receive thee not, I will send upon them a cursing instead of a blessing. And I just want to interject, this is not going to be a heavy-handed talk, but this is the passage, so I'm going to read it. And thou shalt continue in calling upon God in my name, and writing the things which shall be given thee by the Comforter, and expounding all scriptures unto the church. And it shall be given thee in the very moment what thou shalt speak and write, and they shall hear it, or I will send unto them a cursing instead of a blessing. There's historical precedent for this. And again, it's up to you to decide whether the circumstances are similar enough to warrant it or not, right? It's certainly not a question of time, dedication, or sacrifice. Those things, if they're different in my favor, which is a bold but true statement. And again, to the extent that you know me, you know that that's true. My number one priority in life for at least a decade has been to share with you everything God has shared with me. It's the primary focus of all that I do, all day, every day. It doesn't matter if I need to go, fix a hot water heater or mow the lawn. Even in those moments, this is the priority. And like when I get thoughts about whatever, I stop, I write them down. It's what I do all the time. I'm constantly preoccupied with this. And I will continue to do that until the Lord comes, or until he ends my life, or otherwise incapacitates me. If I'm brain dead, obviously, I'll be limited in how much I can do. Although some of you would contend that maybe there wouldn't be so much of a difference in the quality of what I produce. But the Lord has seen to it that I can't do this alone. I tried. I've tried as hard as anybody. But the conclusion of all of that was me getting canceled, my startup getting wrecked, my career getting shot, my investments all going horribly bad. And none of those things were my fault. For my part, I did what was required, more than what was required, to find success. I did all the right things. He's seen to it that all my efforts in temporal wealth have failed. And it's my belief, and I'll share with you some scriptures, that he did this specifically to provide you with an opportunity to contribute to the creation of content beyond your spiritual capacity. It's a pattern. We read that Jesus was made poor so that we could be made rich. Now, you look at that in spiritual terms, and of course that's true, but it's also true temporally. Why wasn't Jesus the richest guy who ever lived? He endured injustice because it helped other people. It increased his service to others. He was a trained professional, but once he began his dedicated ministry, he was completely reliant on donations from others. And we know that those contributions were irregular and uneven. That was the price of the ticket. What I mean by that is to offer people the opportunity to support a servant of God. You guarantee that that servant of God is going to have inconsistent resources. It's part of the price. You see this again and again in the scriptures. So back to Jesus, those contributions were uneven, irregular, and at least sometimes insufficient. How do we know? He and his disciples went hungry from time to time. For example, there was no bread at the mountain where he provided miraculous bread and fish. When he asked, does anyone have bread? First off, none of the 12 said yes. They had gone out to this desert place that was days away from the population with no food. That's how used to it they were. There was some young boy there who happened to have a little bit of food, but it was really only enough for himself. He wasn't like their bag boy carrying their luggage or something. Why did they gather wheat on the Sabbath? If you've ever harvested wheat by hand, you know how little food you're going to get out of just grabbing heads of wheat as you're walking through a field and rubbing them in your hands, like it said that they did. This was the tiniest little pathetic snack. It would not do the least bit to satiate your hunger. Plus, if you've ever chewed on wheat berries, I mean, that is not a very pleasant thing. It's a starvation. It's a starvation behavior. You'd only do it if you were starving. Otherwise, you wouldn't even bother. So, and then you consider the fact that even though he obviously had the power to miraculously create food, as far as we know, he only used it for others. And we read in Mosiah 3:7 that his temptations included pain of body, hunger, and thirst. So why did he go hungry? He went hungry for the same reason Elijah needed to be fed by the ravens and the widow, and Elisha needed to be fed by the woman. I hope I got the widow and woman right there. So that the people he served had the opportunity to serve God by helping him. That's the reason. And if you've ever been without food for a prolonged period of time or in some other very unpleasant temporal situation, it's amazing to think that Elijah, the Lord's leading person on the earth during his life, was subjected to the same conditions of famine as the people, and not because of him. In spite of who he was, he also went through that. And he had to, the ravens weren't bringing him Big Macs with a large fry and a Diet Coke, right? This was little bits of nasty food. When he went to the widow, she just made him a little cake with a little water. That's all he had. This was not nice food, right? So why did God give them that path of suffering? It was to provide others with the opportunity to provide value to them. So we shouldn't misunderstand what's actually in play here. This is a privilege for those who serve God's servants, not a need of God's servants. What I always go back to with this is that Noah didn't need the ark. The ark needed Noah. God said he would destroy everything and spare Noah. Noah didn't need to build the boat. The boat was it was constructed by his children so that his children could pay a price for what they were receiving. Anyway, as a servant of Jesus Christ, I am fully confident that my master will provide everything sufficient for me to accomplish the orders he has given me. And I don't care what suffering that includes. I'll die trying if that's what it takes. The question is, and he's more than capable of accomplishing his purposes, with or without me. The question is, how much will you help? You have the opportunity of being God's hands. This is a great honor. It's a great opportunity. He's giving you the opportunity to participate in something he really doesn't need you to do. He doesn't need you for. And he's giving you the opportunity to participate as much as you can. This is not terribly unlike the situation with Moses and Aaron and Hur. And maybe you can't do what Moses did. But all it takes to be able to do what Aaron and Hur did is to hold up his arms, so that he could continue to flow greater power from God into the soldiers on the battlefield. Now let's talk about the battlefield. We read in another place that in several places, that not all soldiers end up on the battlefield. Maybe you can't or won't fight in the battle, but can you at least send provisions for those who can and will, to the extent that you're able? And the alternative is to sit upon your thrones and, because of the exceeding goodness of God, think that you could do nothing and he would deliver you. That's from Alma 60:11. It's not right to expect these things to flow to you without contributing as much as you're able, or at all. Point number 2. You have the opportunity of serving those who have already served you. The joy that you have in something will always be limited to the price you've paid for it. So we always talk about the gospel being free. it's given freely, but it costs everything. It costs everything for the person who's giving it to you, and it costs you everything to give it to someone else. While what someone gives you as a free gift may have tremendous value, you'll only value it to the extent you comprehend the cost. The cost incurred in doing so is a principal reason of why God asks us to share what we've received with others. Another way God helps us increase the value we find in what we've already received is to help those who gave it to us. In Matthew 10, the Lord said, "He that receiveth you, receiveth me, and he that receiveth me, receiveth him that sent me. He that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he that receiveth a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water only, in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward." And in Matthew 25:40, he said, "And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." Now, frequently when we read scriptures like this and we see phrases like the least or little children or little ones, we're thinking of the abject poor and children. But if you know the ancient language, languages, you know that this is not just speaking of people who are temporally poor or of some sort of diminutive stature. In reality, these phrases primarily refer to the Lord's servants, the real ones, those who suffer the most and work the hardest for the benefit of others. That should cause you, this is a side note, but it's important since we're here, to reinterpret the passages about hanging a millstone around someone's neck and throw him into the sea, and how that would be better than to offend his little ones. He wasn't talking about children. He was talking about his servants. It's the same word in Greek. A great test of how you feel about God is how you treat those who are most like him. I'm going to repeat that again because it's a crucial point. A great test of how you feel about God is how you treat those who are most like him. In Matthew 7, we read, "Wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them. Not every one that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity." The Lord's covenant is everything he has in exchange for everything you have. I'll repeat that one again. The Lord's covenant is everything he has in exchange for everything you have. That actually puts to bed all sorts of false ideas about repentance. But apropos to what we're talking about, the Lord's servants carry this covenant at scale. They give you everything the Lord has given them. Remember when we're reading about the Good Shepherd in John chapter 10. The Good Shepherd gives his life for the sheep. And that's how you can tell the difference between a shepherd and a wolf in sheep's clothing. They give you everything the Lord has given them. The right response is nothing less than everything the Lord has given you. But that's not at all what I have asked from you or what I am asking from you. None of you are ready for that. And even if any of you were, it would place upon me demands that would preclude the time I need to generate the materials needed for the few who will eventually get there. The ask is much less than that. What I've asked from you and what I continue to ask from you is that you donate the value you find in these things up to what you can afford without displacing anything more important. That has been the message. That's been the request. Donate the value you find in these things up to what you can afford without displacing anything more important. I've had people describe how much this work has blessed them, and yet very few of them, the ones who have expressed the gratitude and the value, very few of them make monthly recurring donations as I have requested. This is like the 10 lepers who were healed, but only one came back and thanked the Lord. If you really value these things and you think that they're true, it's weird to me that that would disconnect from what I've asked. Some have even come to me and said that they've made more progress in reading one book or even in watching one video than they have in a lifetime of going to church. These are things people have actually told me. Yet you've got a set of people who, for the most part, happily paid 10% of their income to a church their whole lives, and they won't even pitch in a few bucks a month to help me keep doing this. Now, to be clear, what I'm asking for is not tithing, and it's not for the care of the poor, beyond however much I fulfill that description. And for now, I'm sure there are people way worse off than me. But the poor are those who you owe nothing to and who could never pay you back. You are being asked to pay forward the value you have already received for free, and to do so to support my work as I continue to produce it and share it with you and others. This is a completely different situation. This is not the case of someone you owe nothing to or someone who could never pay you back. As Jesus taught, this is more important than giving to the poor, in part because it's the only real solution for their poverty. I've given him everything, time and again, for a long time. In exchange, he's given me things so valuable that they can't coexist with normal life. And in doing that, he's made me reliant on those who have not yet done that. But in this, you have the opportunity of giving the maximal sacrifice you're prepared to give and receiving the maximal blessing that you're presently willing to pay for. Now, if you are in the camp that desires to give but truly has no way to make space in your budget to do so, I will continue to ask God to bless you for the goodness of your heart. And I thank you for that. However, there are many who spend their money on themselves while claiming that they can't donate it because it's for the poor. And that's a very wicked thing to do if it happens to fit your situation. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully it's not true for anyone. But this is much like the sin that the Jews committed in Jesus' time. They had this thing called Corban, which was property that was set aside for the needs of the poor. And they used it as an excuse to avoid spending their money to care for their parents who were needy. And so this was a common practice where they'd say, oh, well, that's reserved for holy things, so I can't help out my parents. And in the meantime, they would just spend it on themselves. And the Lord taught through correcting them that you actually have to think about what generates the greatest value and route your resources to that. I think you'd be surprised to find that the people who do donate, they span all income levels, as do the people who think that they can't afford to, which is funny, right? Now, everybody has their own circumstances, and that's one of the reasons I absolutely hate talking about this. There's a long list, right? But one problem is that people base their ability to donate, some people, on the percent of their income that they spend instead of what they spend it on. Check to check doesn't mean you're poor. It just means you spend all your money. Now, people who are poor do spend all their money. But just because you're spending all your money, it doesn't mean you're spending it on the most important things. Many, many people spend everything they earn, even when they earn 2, 3, 4, or 10 times the per capita average income. That doesn't mean you're spending it on good things. Now, who am I to tell you that you're not? I don't know your situation. But if your conscience is condemning you right now as I say these things, if you're offended by this, then you know that it does apply to you. That's a wonderful trick to learn. People think that them being offended makes them right. More often than not, it's the opposite. It means whatever you're hearing correctly condemns you. That's the Holy Ghost, more often than not, telling you this is true and you don't live up to it, and that's why you feel bad. A person who's honestly giving all they can to a righteous cause, their response to something like this is, I wish I had more because I'd give more. Now, I know this because I've been in a situation where I had nothing and I prayed to the Lord. And I was reading in the Book of Mormon where King Benjamin was saying this. And I said, yes, I do wish that I had more so that I could give more. And hopefully you're in that boat too. It's important. And again, it has nothing to do with me. I didn't say, I wish I had more so I could give to a certain person who's asking for it. I said, I know that there are people who need and don't have. And I wish I had to give to help them. Now, a related thought, a common belief is that there's always someone else who could more easily donate than you. Look, if you receive the benefit, you should bear the cost. And the priority of supporting should fit exactly at the value you perceive in what you receive. Do you get that? If you're receiving great value, you ought to be contributing greatly. If you receive little value, you should contribute a little. So for most, I hope that whatever value you get out of this is ahead of whatever value you get from DoorDash or Starbucks or even media subscriptions. If you watch even close to every video I make, you're probably spending more time watching or listening than you do to some paid subscription service. So at least the value is there for you, right? But for some, they value this more than putting their kids into after-school sports or some hobby they have, or even going on vacations with their family. Maybe there's a less expensive option for a vacation, and you say, well, if we can save this much, I value it to that level. Now, what that value is up to you. It's your perception. But whatever you value, and this, again, it goes far beyond anything to do with me. What you value in life, I challenge you to align your spending to match it. If you don't have the money because you're spending things on things that you regard as having lesser value, I call upon you to repent. That's a sin. This includes those who continue to financially support a church that they do not doctrinally support. Far too many people are in a situation where they're giving their money to a church that they say they don't believe what it teaches. And there are various reasons for that. None of them are good. I want to make a point here that I hope is crystal clear. The principles that I'm teaching you here are true whether I'm the subject of them or not. And we have to get a lot more comfortable in receiving instructions about how we use our resources, whether we're talking about money or time or otherwise. It's a serious barrier to building Zion. Did you know that greed was the number one cause of why Joseph Smith's group failed to build Zion? You can read about it right in D&C 105. The Lord says it. I'll read this from verse 1 onward. Let's see, we're going to do 1 through 6. Verily I say unto you, who have assembled yourselves together, that ye may learn my will concerning the redemption of mine afflicted people. Behold, I say unto you, were it not for the transgressions of my people, speaking concerning the church and not individuals, they might have been redeemed even now. But behold, they have not learned to be obedient to the things which I required at their hands, but are full of all manner of evil, and do not impart of their substance, as becometh saints, to the poor and afflicted among them, and are not united according to the union required by the law of the celestial kingdom. And Zion cannot be built up unless it is by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom. Otherwise I cannot receive her unto myself. And my people must needs be chastened until they learn obedience, if it must needs be, by the things which they suffer. We are unprofitable servants. God gives us money, even through processes where we're working very hard and sacrificing and risking and all this. He gives us money in order not to reward us for our hard work, but in order to provide us with the opportunity to spend it on the things of greatest value. That's why it's given. When you divert it to things of lesser value, do you know what he calls it? Again, I'm not trying to be heavy-handed here, but reread Malachi. He calls it stealing from him. That's serious, right? Undue attachment to your money is a problem that will keep you out of Zion, whether you decide to send some to me or not. Now, again, just to be totally clear, there are many people who have no attachment to their money whatsoever. You know, they're like Frodo in The Lord of the Rings when he offers the ring up to that elf queen. And she says, "You would just give this to me?" And she was shocked because other people would covet that ring. There are people like that with money. And so obviously I'm not talking to you. But there are quite a few who struggle with this. And between where you are and where you say you want to be will be many opportunities to give your money to other people. And you have to learn to be as liberal with others as God has been with you, to support those who encounter surprise affliction, to make amends for injustice levied against the righteous, because they do what the Lord would do in their place, or whatever other situation may arise. It goes far beyond, I'm going to give this trinket token to a person I regard as poor. Much more will be said about this, but I just want to go into detail here because this is probably going to be offensive enough that this might be the last thing you ever watch from me. So if that's the case, consider yourself forewarned. All right, my final point is that you should give as long as you get more than you give. Many of the concerns we have about the gospel actually only apply to the counterfeit. The true gospel is loaded with protections for the righteous. One example of that is the principle I'm about to teach you now. In short, just to give you the bottom line up front, you should be getting more out of anyone who says they're your servant in Christ. You should get much more out of them than you ever give them. You can't put the Lord into debt. You also can't put his servants into your debt. A servant of God, a real one, is a machine that transforms whatever you give him or her into something much more valuable and eternally enduring than whatever you gave them. This actually fits quite well into that diagram I showed you, that I need to come up with a name for it, but that ladder diagram. the thing from above is always greater than the thing from beneath. This is John chapter 15, I believe, with the true vine. Without me, you're nothing. You can reread that chapter, but the good stuff comes from above, right? It's better than what comes from below, but it's the reaction between the two that makes progress possible. A servant of God is a machine that transforms what you give him or her into something much more valuable and eternally enduring. If that's not happening, you're not dealing with a true servant of God. An example of this is given in how the priests worked in Moses' time. The people would raise these animals and take the best to the priest. The priest would prepare the sacrifice and would add salt. He would make it better, and he had this unique ability to do so, to upgrade its value. The people received back more than they gave. They got part of the sacrifice back, depending on the specifics of what kind it was, in the form of cooked meat, but also the sacrifice that the priest burned on their behalf was greater than anything they could do. Literally, they weren't allowed to do this. The priests had to. But in many cases, they would also get cooked meat back, and they would get the blessings of all of this, right? So the sum total was much greater than what they gave. Where did the extra come from? The priest. When Alma showed up at Amulek's house, he asked Amulek for food. That was his request. He said, "Will you feed a humble servant of God?" He didn't present any doctrine. He just said that he was a servant of God and that he was hungry. So Amulek fed him, and he helped him recover from this long journey where he was without food for durations of it. What did Alma give Amulek in return? He gave him everything he had been missing. And then, when Amulek was persecuted for the gospel's sake and he lost everything and everyone turned against him, Alma allowed Amulek to live with him at his estate. Amulek received much more from Alma than he ever gave to Alma. And this is the pattern. But there was an exchange, right? So what's wonderful about this principle is that there's an even better way to live it. And that is to provide the value before the recipient makes the sacrifice. This is much closer to what the Lord did. We read in Romans 5:8, God commendeth his love towards us in that, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. The Lord's mortal ministry was done at a time when, quoting from another scripture, there was no man. There was no one worthy of that sacrifice when Christ came and made it. He calls us up to more than we would otherwise be through giving us more than we currently deserve. That's the invitation for us to step up to a higher level. He gives it to us for free. And he told us to love others the same way he loves us. We're supposed to do the same. The problem is, only people filled with the love of Christ will do that. In part because we all know that almost everyone will take almost everything you can give, and they won't even be willing to give back to you the bare minimum that you need to keep going. When you donate, if you find value in these things, I transform that money into greater light and truth than what you have. And I give it freely to you and everybody else because it's published publicly. Now you share in that blessing because you had a part in it. And you get to keep that eternally in heaven. From every soul that draws near to God because of it. And that's a really big deal, folks. Jesus said, "Take heed what you hear. With what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you. And unto you that hear shall more be given." Mark 4:24. If you don't value what God provides through me, or you don't think he provides anything through me, by all means, don't donate. But if you do, if you value what I'm doing, and you're taking it without contributing as much as you can in your situation up to that perceived value, you are declaring to God that you do not want more of it. I will not be able to continue what I'm doing without the continued support of those who are already donating and the new support of new and existing donors. As you give the value you perceive in these things up to what you can afford without displacing anything more important, God will bless you. He will at least bless you with more of what you've already found valuable in the existing materials. It's a pretty safe bet. As you know, with everything I produce, you receive more and more answers to questions you haven't been able to answer, and in some cases, you haven't been able to ask. Solutions to problems you've not been able to solve, and in some cases that you didn't even see before. An understanding of ideas that you did not previously understand, and in many cases that you didn't even know about. Strength to overcome situations that presently overcome you, some of which you did not realize. But above all, greater revelation of the Lord Jesus Christ to you. My mission in life is to reveal him and to glorify him. So thank you for making that possible.